Shalom, good morning. There's a lot of confusion about being an Israelite, and that is what I hope to bring clarity to. And I'm not attempting to teach over or assume authority over any man. The Bible does not say that women cannot teach, it just says that they are not to usurp authority over a man and to teach men. So that's not what I'm attempting to do. If a man desires to listen to this video, that's his choice. So I'm not usurping authority over him. But, there's no reason to be offended of who the Israelites are. This is actually a cause for rejoicing for myself, and it should be for you also. Like I said in the last video, if you claim that you would be content to just be a doorkeeper in the house of Yahuwah, then you have no room to be offended at who the Hebrew Israelites are. But there's this false social construct of race, which has fueled racism, and, for so-called white folks to be offended at the Hebrew Israelites, even when they say a Gentile cannot be saved, we know that's not true, but for it to offend you, or for the truth to offend you, it just goes to show the lack of compassion that you have for them, because they're the ones who have been lied to the most. They're the ones who have had their identity stolen. They're the ones who the white Jesus was pushed on the most, because, this is the image of their slave master. And so, being told that they were worthless and not even human, and that they came from apes, and just all that they have been through. And then most so-called white folks turn around and make real light of that and say things like, well, slavery was done away, or they just need to get over it, and yet nobody has paid for this, and yet they are still under oppression today. They're still targeted by the governments of the world and this government today, and most people are ignorant to that fact and just judge them. I'm not saying it's okay for a person to be a drug dealer. However, you don't realize the predicament that many of these men are in, that they don't have homes because they can't live with the women, because the women are on welfare, and they can't get welfare if the man is in the home. This was targeted at them. And also, they weren't able to get their education because growing up, most of their family was traumatized because of the aftermath of generations of aftermath of all the abuse, of slavery, and then trying to cope through alcohol and drugs, and the parents not getting their education. And then, but even when they have it, the opportunities are not the same. And especially in the areas where they've been herded into these inner cities, there's not many jobs for them, and then if they have had children by women who leave with the children and run to the government to get child support, well, then their whole check is gone to that. Here in Missouri, they can take up to 60% of your check. So, my husband is forced to find cash jobs, which really hinders his ability to get a lot of hours, especially when the weather starts acting up. So a lot of people's, ignorance is just ignorance, and you really should have compassion and sympathy on them, and not be so quick to judge them, and not be so quick to be offended yourself, because if you really understood what they have been through, then you would have more compassion and sympathy, and you would understand why they have a little more room, in my opinion, to be upset than we do, because it's the white man who has oppressed them. They haven't oppressed us, so who are we to be offended? But, people like to say, when you bring up who the Hebrew Israelites are or who the Jews are, they like to say, oh, it was a mixed multitude. Israel was not a mixed multitude. A mixed multitude came out of Egypt, okay? That means Israel and other nations came out and were saved. Now, some would say those nations were sent off later, and there's scripture for that. But a mixed multitude was saved. That doesn't mean Israel is a mixed multitude. Yes, they have intermarried, over the years, but that's not what you're saying. You're talking about a mixed multitude that came out of Egypt. So that is saying Israel and other nations were saved, which is clear in the scripture that Yah has made a way of salvation for the other nations, that they join Israel, not replace them, that they cleave to them, that they serve them, and they will be like one of them, but they still didn't have the bloodline of an Israelite, right? He said that as long as the sun, moon, and stars abide, that they will never cease to be a nation. So there's no replacing. There's no spiritual Israel. What there is the spiritual seed of Abraham. In Romans 9, it says that not all Israel is Israel, okay? Because if they're not born again, right? If they don't have the Spirit, then they're not. They may be bloodline, but they're not going to be saved, okay? And then it says that they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of Yah, but the children of the promise are counted for the seed, right? So it gives the example of Isaac and Ishmael, and that you have to be, of the promise of faith, right? But that makes you a child of Yah and the seed of Abraham. It doesn't mean you are an Israelite. That is a bloodline thing, right? We're grafted in and we're adopted, and we, become children of Abraham and children of Yah, and right? But it never says that we become Israel. So I just want to bring up those things when I come across it, just to try to help with the confusion, and just to try to encourage people to receive the Hebrews and to love them and to have pity and mercy on them and to care for them more than your own personal pride and stuff, that you have to be the son. You don't have to be the son. You said you would be content just to be a doorkeeper. So it shouldn't matter who the actual bloodline people are to you. It does matter to them, but to you, it shouldn't be a reason for offense. You should rejoice for them. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say this morning. Baruch Yahuwah and Shalom.